He was one of the key architects of mRNA technology that's in all of our vaccines. He was nominated for a Nobel Peace Prize. His name is Dr. Robert Malone. But the question is, why is this man, a top scientist, so censored? I have him on tonight on Rob Nelson Live. Hey, I'm Rob Nelson. I used to host a show on Fox, and now I do a digital live stream called Rob Nelson Live. And my whole mission is to figure out how, in this time of division, we can find common ground.
Speech, and they're not allowed to do that anymore.
I understand what you're talking about.
They be focused on rebuilding California.
Oh, it's so true. Come on. This is where this gets real.
He says your headings.
I wouldn't want to be black and driving in a car.
Right.
Point there, right? Some of what's in this music, you can't sanitize it. You know, we are in the most interesting of times, right? We're in the COVID pandemic. Now we're like in the post-pandemic, but some people feel like we're still in the pandemic, right? I mean, in my mind, we're through the pandemic. Doesn't mean COVID's gone, but we're still some people living in a pandemic mentality, some people not. What's clearly true is that there is a divide between those who believe we should vaccinate everybody, no matter what. That's the Biden administration's approach. Vaccinate every single person, period, in the United States. I don't care if they're 2 years old or 90. Get everyone 1, 2, 3 shots. And those who are like, no, maybe you vaccinate those most at risk, but you actually let others actually have a choice or let their natural immunity take care of them. But either way, this divide has polarized our country. And those who have argued, even with science, that there is a reason to not vaccinate everyone have been largely shut down by the traditional mainstream media, which, as you guys know, I have argued really puppets what the Biden administration wants to say. I've said before, if Biden had been president, a year and 2 years ago when Trump was president and the pandemic had hit, we'd have a whole different approach. But it got political, and now science has largely been thrown out the window. I have one of the most interesting people in the world to talk about this. His name is Dr. Robert Malone. He is one of I call him the architect of mRNA technology, the basis of our vaccines. And he is a lifelong vaccine scientist. Dr. Robert Malone, thanks for joining me. Really appreciate it.
My pleasure, Rob. And congratulations on the launch of this great show. And for the opportunity, thank you for the opportunity to participate in it.
Oh, you're welcome. Look, let's jump right in. We got a lot of things I want to cover with you. I want to cover so much ground in 40 minutes with you. But what I want to start with is just so people understand, you before the pandemic, I mean, you've maybe been a little controversial throughout your life. Anybody who does what you do could be, but you were a lifelong, I don't know if you call it a vaccinologist, but somebody who focused on developing vaccines to save lives, and arguably were the key person behind developing the technology that makes mRNA, in our vaccines. Is that fair?
Yeah, both vaccines and drugs and medical countermeasures for infectious disease, among other things, cancer and many other applications. But it's always been my business model to lay low. I support a wide range of clients, large commercial clients, U.S. government, Department of Defense. Sometimes I touch on the intelligence community. I have secret classification. And it's just been good business for me in running my consulting shop to stay behind the scenes and let other people take credit. So this is kind of a weird, unusual new world for me where I've been thrust into the public sphere.
Right. And you have, your Twitter account has almost 500,000 followers. Clearly people want to follow you, but I want people who are skeptics. Obviously your followers know this. It's fair. We've had this conversation before. It is fair to say you are one of the key, you didn't design these vaccines, but you are one of the key architects of the technology that is mRNA. Is that fair to say?
Absolutely. The core technology and all the original patents basically came off of my bench and stuff that I did first at the Salk Institute in La Jolla in the late 80s, and then at a little startup called Vical, where I set up a skunk works, and that resulted in a number of other discoveries. Many people have expanded and carried on since, and I've done other groundbreaking patented work relating to vaccines in particular,
right.
But that's where it comes from.
You, Dr. Malone, you are an anti-vaxxer. You hate vaccines. You don't want vaccines being anywhere near you. You are like, you think the world is flat. I mean, I'm being facetious, but people do think you're an anti-vaxxer. And I don't think they realize, I got you to laugh, by the way. I don't think they realize that you actually spent your whole career developing vaccines.
Yeah, I'm pretty much the opposite of an anti-vaxxer, I would say. And it's not just vaccines, but the fundamental technology that leads to many other vaccines. I played a key role in bringing the Ebola vaccine forward that we now call the Merck Ebola vaccine. I've worked on many influenza vaccines. I am deeply an insider, work closely with the FDA, work closely with the DOD, sit on NIH study sections. I currently sit on the NIH active committee for clinical research. This is what I do, and it always has been.
And just to be clear, you actually, as one of the architects of mRNA, believe that mRNA has the potential to do amazing things. Is that fair? That it has the potential to be a transformative technology in vaccination and health. Is that a fair statement?
Yeah, I think that and not only me, the investment community thinks so. There is a huge amount of money on the table right now, because what this has opened up is a whole new class of molecules that can be used for a variety of purposes. The mRNA strategy makes it so that you can basically do genetic modification manipulation, like you can use it like a drug.
So help me understand that. So, because I think people they hear mRNA, they know it's something, but you're saying it actually allows you to, because that's one thing I was like, how could it help cure cancer? Bless you. How could it help cure cancer, right? You don't get a vaccine for cancer. It's not just a vaccine technology is what you're saying. Or you would get a vaccine for cancer.
Actually, cancer vaccines is a big area.
Okay.
So, yeah, that is, so I think that the most present application that is easiest to grasp is that what's unique about this, there's a number of things, but in particular, you can change the sequence of the RNA basically on your computer by keying in different sequences. And yet the overall preparation, formulation, manufacturing, all that process stays the same. So what that means is that you can make new products very, very rapidly. And that opens up the door for personalized medicine, personalized vaccines that are designed for your cancer, rapid production of vaccines against newly emergent pathogens. And in the biodefense world, it makes it so that if the bad guys engineer a new nasty, the good guys can quickly come up with something that can provide protection against, against that pathogen for, say, special ops people.
Wow. So, and by the way, we got a lot of comments coming in, everybody. We're going to put your comments up. I'm not going to take a lot of time to address them, but yes, this recording will be available afterward on YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, but there's a YouTube link out there, so you can watch it after. So given that, Robert, given that this is a remarkable technology and you helped create it, why don't you like this vaccine for COVID? And I need you to give me the layperson scientific thing, because I think, once you get too deep in the weeds, people don't know what you're talking about anyway. And most of our audience isn't doctors. So I want people to understand where your hesitancy is coming from, because we've established you're not against vaccines. And you, in fact, are a big proponent of mRNA because you helped create it and think it could do a remarkable thing. So why wouldn't you want this vaccine to be saving lives with COVID?
And it does. And I am very glad to see that and honored to have had my role in enabling that. But all medical products, and particularly vaccines, have to be developed responsibly and safely, and they have to be deployed responsibly and safely. And that's where I'm coming from. Is I'm not only a 30-year veteran, I have had a stupid amount of education and training and yearly renewals, etc., about bioethics and about the proper way to do things. And what we've done here is just throw all the rules right into the trash can. So what does that mean? It means that governments are insisting on deploying these vaccines in pregnant women when we don't have safety data in pregnant women that's worth Tinker's dam. They're insisting on jabbing the kids when all the data we have shows that the risk-benefit ratio for kids is upside down. What that means is we're going to have more kids die of the jabs than we're going to have die of COVID. We have completely disregarded all the norms in terms of the safety testing, et cetera, and just rushed everything out the door. And that, personally for me, it's kind of a professional insult, because what you've had is a situation where all the rules that have been developed over decades by people like me, that people like me have to implement, have been thrown out the window. And now we're seeing the consequences of that, which is the adverse events, the risks coming out, all the controversy. It's destroying the entire vaccine enterprise. It's destroying what I spent my entire life building, not just the technology.
What are the core,
everything else?
What are the core basic rules that have been ignored here? Because I think for a lot of people, Dr. Malone, I think for a lot of people, they look at this and they don't know what to think anymore. You know, you don't want to go like off the conspiracy, bandwagon and think, oh, they're putting chips in it and it's, UFO, aliens, right? But at the same time, people hear this and they go, well, I don't know. They're saying the vaccines are safe. Sure, some people are going to have adverse things, but hey, 500,000 people in the U.S. died of COVID. Maybe that number is somewhat, but lots, thousands and thousands of people died. Like, it's a bad thing.
Yeah, so the easiest one to start with is the bioethics. We have rules that have gone all the way back to the Nuremberg trials. They're in federal law as the common rule that says that for experimental products, we won't force people to take them. You have to have full informed consent, and you can't be coerced or incentivized by money or any of these other things, intimidated to take an experimental product into your body. And yet we have the government forcing everybody to get the jab. That's just flat out not legal, and it's not bioethically appropriate. That's the easiest one. Then there's all the other stuff about cutting short the safety testing, which normally takes a couple of years at a minimum to ensure that you don't have autoimmune disease, et cetera. And then back behind that, there's all the testing that's always done before they ever even go into humans to make sure that the distribution and the duration of the expression of the protein, how long it sticks around, at what level, where it goes, what it does it affect the reproductive tissues, does it cause birth defects? All that stuff was cut short.
So I want to ask specifically about that. I think fertility is a huge question. And by the way, I've argued from the beginning, they had to rush to get this vaccine out. That part I understand. And this is just my opinion. So you can tell me if you think I'm wrong. The mistake they made was not being honest about that, in saying, oh, we've done all the safety. You and I've had this conversation where I've said, how can you tell me you're still figuring out how effective it is, but you're certain it's safe? Like, maybe it's safe for a week, but how could you possibly know it's safe for a year? You didn't test it for a year. If you didn't test a lot of pregnant women, how do you know it's going to affect pregnant women? So just their failure to be honest, because I understand the rush to get it, and that's giving them a lot of leeway going. The pharmaceutical companies had a lot of money to make, but I get we wanted a vaccine, and I understand that. And, if I'm a sick old person or an immunocompromised person, I was probably jumping in line to get that shot. I mean, I am vaccinated. You know that. I'm vaccinated. I got the J&J. But again, it was more because I didn't want to deal with it. You can judge me for that. But I didn't care. I was like, I'll get the J&J. Fine. I'll be fine either way. I'll get COVID. I'll get the vaccine. But for a lot of people, I think they feel like I just don't have enough data, and they haven't been honest with the data.
Oh, that's absolutely true. They've manipulated the data all over the place. This gets back to this Nobel lie point. That's another thing, is we've for a large fraction of the population, we've destroyed the faith of the public in the public healthcare system because of all the misrepresentations and flip-flops. And it's gone on and on and on. We can talk about Dr. Fauci. He's one notable example, but there are many, many others. The current director of the CDC just seems to have no shame. So, for those of us that are scientists and are data-based and are focused on data-based decision-making for medicines, we find the whole thing shocking and a bit revolting because of all of the lies. They just don't stop.
So I want to note a couple of people I'm watching the feeds coming up, and I'm quickly seeing all kinds of things. Everything from, you have some diehard supporters who said, we're here to hear Dr. Malone. So I think they want me just to shut up and let you give a lecture. But others,
That would be no fun at all.
no, right? They don't understand. But whatever, they want that, that's fine. It won't happen. But that you can see Dr. Malone's lectures other places. But there's others who are saying, why doesn't Dr. Malone do something to help people who are facing these demonic shots, as they called it? And other people suggesting that you're using kind of pseudo speak to avoid like getting down and dirty with the truth, that you're just kind of spinning. So leaving aside the me talking part, let's address the fact that people think that you're spinning something and you're not just getting down to it. So let's pick a topic. Let's pick kids, right? In the most simplistic terms, why would you not vaccinate kids?
Because the risk of death and serious disease caused by the vaccine in children is at least 6-fold higher than the risk of death and disease from the virus itself. And that's only for the adverse events that the CDC acknowledges. There's many others. And then there is the whole long tail of all the things that we don't know about the kids. The kids don't get bad disease. They have better immune systems than the grown-ups do, and certainly better than I do. And they shrug this thing off, and then they develop natural immunity, which is what we need if we're not going to select mutant escape viruses, super viruses, that are able to evade these vaccines and evade your immune system. So leave the kids alone. Right. They don't get bad disease. And when they do get infected, they develop better immune responses than if they did get vaccinated. And oh, by the way, the adverse events associated with vaccination of somebody who is COVID recovered are much higher than in people who have not been vaccinated and who have not been infected. In other words, if you jab people, and about at least half the kids probably have already been infected. So you're jabbing all the kids, and half of those kids probably are already immune. And
why is that, Robert? Why is
more disease in them?
Why is that bad? So again, I want to emphasize, and I've said this before, the number of kids, I think the number varies, but who died in the U.S. from COVID is, in the year and a half, is somewhere around 400 to 500. That's not good, but that's that's no more than the flu. I mean, you don't want any kids to
actually
die.
Rob, that's a little off the way you're saying it. One of the problems we've had is that the hospitals have financial incentives to call somebody as COVID associated. They get a bonus every time. If somebody is on their deathbed, they do a nasal swab and it comes up PCR positive, they get extra money. Okay, so what's happened with all of these, and with the kids in particular, is that, there's probably less than 400 COVID-associated deaths since the beginning of the outbreak in children. That means less than 18, by the way. And of those, virtually 100% of those are kids that had major pre-existing conditions, like cystic fibrosis, cancer, other autoimmune immune deficiencies, etc. So they didn't die necessarily of COVID. They died with COVID, with major pre-existing conditions. So when you look at the kids that didn't have major pre-existing disease, there's virtually no death, zero.
Right. You're vaccinated, right?
Mrna ×2, after having been infected in the beginning of late February, early March of 2020. And I wanted to be able to travel. And I thought that there was rumor that it could help with long COVID. What happened to me is I developed major adverse events. My systolic blood, that's the upper number in your blood pressure, went up to about 230. It's a good thing I didn't blow a vessel in my head or dissect my aorta, because that's what happens with a lot of older people. And I got restless leg syndrome, narcolepsy, and a bunch of other things. These are all known side effects associated with the jab, particularly in people that have already been infected. So I'm kind of a case study in that problem.
And it's interesting that we're both vaccinated. And again, I'm not anti-vaccine, and I'm not even anti-COVID. I've said to you before, I think if you're older or I take the vaccine rather than risk COVID. And I know we haven't talked about early treatment, which could change that. But when you get to the kids thing, intuitively, when the deaths are so low from the disease and they're healthy, their ability to survive it so high, it makes almost no sense why you would force them to be vaccinated, period, for anything. And that's where I don't understand. Like, most of them are going to be fine. And I have a friend who's a pediatric ER doctor at a very big hospital in New York. He's very well known. And he said throughout this, he's like, kids do fine with this. He's like, man, in the middle of the pandemic, we didn't have any kids in ICU beds. We had all old people. Like, we filled all our beds for kids with old people. But there's a fear for doctors to go out and say this, like somehow, and I don't understand why there's this pressure to silence doctors and scientists from saying what seems to me just obvious. Very few kids die of this. Most of them do fine. Many of them have had it. Why would you insist on vaccinating them? Why?
So I think there's two explanations. One of them revolves around the thesis that kids are spreaders, super spreaders. And so they're putting others at risk because they are likely to spread it around in the population. The data don't really support that. The kids do contribute to spreading and through their shedding, but so do adults, even vaccinated adults. It's fascinating if you deconstruct, and I'm going to, tolerate me on this. Go with me for a minute, Rob. Okay.
We're going deep, guys. We're going science deep here.
No, we're not going science deep. We're going media deep.
Okay.
So hopefully some of you got a chance to see that lovely little Big Bird pitch on CNN with Sanjay Gupta. And what was fascinating about that, basically direct marketing to children by CNN and Sanjay Gupta, was the way it was constructed. You had Grandma Big Bird being interviewed, and she said she was being asked, "Well, what are you doing about Big Bird?" "Well, I've looked into all the research, and I've decided that it absolutely is appropriate that Big Bird get his vaccine, and so I've scheduled him for his vaccination today." Okay, and then she tells Big Bird that he's going to have to go in and be vaccinated, and there's all the cute stuff with stuffed animals. When you deconstruct that, what you've got is messaging that Grandma is afraid of the virus, and she wants grandson, Big Bird, to go get the jab. Why? Because she's the one that's afraid, not Big Bird. It's because the elders are wanting to be protected because they're afraid, because there's been so much fear pushed onto everyone. Mm-hmm. And these older folk that aren't always equipped, they're very dependent on television often, and very easily swayed through advertising. They've been told to be very, very afraid. And I think that a lot of what's driving this is older people fearful about their risk for death and disease, and they're basically wanting to have children vaccinated to protect them.
Yeah. It's interesting you say that. I mean, I recently interviewed Dr. Monica Gandhi from UCSF, who's a very pro head of infectious disease. They're very pro vaccination. They did a lot of the early mask studies. And she's 100% vaccination, feels like even if you've had COVID, you should get the vaccine, thinks it's the strongest immunity. But she acknowledged as a scientist that when we are masking kids, and she's on the Biden COVID summit, she's right in that mainstream. When we are masking kids, it is purely for the psychological benefit of the teachers. She said there is no medical benefit for masking kids in schools. Now, I argued with her, well, that's not a good reason. She's like, well, maybe it is because it opened up schools. And I'm like, and what's it doing to the kids? But even she didn't pretend that it was like actually medically valuable. So to your point, like we're protecting adult psyches more than we're actually protecting kids.
And at the damage of child psyches. This is the sick, sad thing here, is the suicide rate and depression rate in children worldwide has spiked. It's gone through the roof like we've never seen before. They're having, and by the way, social isolation is affecting the IQ of children. Children need to have social stimulation in order to have their brains grow and develop those neural connections. It's not just their ability to interact, have emotional IQ. They physically need to have complex interactive environments. and they're being put into a prison-like environment, told to cover their face so they can't see each other's expressions. And they're surrounded by prison guards. They've turned the schools into prisons and the teachers into prison guards.
Yeah.
It is really affecting the psychological health of our children. It is shocking, and it's going to be with us for decades.
Yeah, and I see it in kids all the time. You see it in their eyes. You see it, they're afraid, that fear. Forget the developmental losses, So, so again, I don't want to get into whether there's a cruel agenda here, but because I want to move to mandates. Just a note to some of the people watching. I know I see some of your comments are like, "Hey, Rob, keep it short. We're here to watch Dr. Malone," and that's fine. I'm just going to say you can watch somewhere else. My way is we have a conversation. It's like, if you want to just see Cliff Note questions, I can direct you to some great Dr. Malone videos. And I'm relatively certain, Robert, you're not offended that I'm engaging in a conversation with you. So,
nope.
So let's talk mandates, because I think that's where it hits a real button. We talked about kids. We talked about natural immunity briefly, but you would argue natural immunity is the strongest protection you could get, right? And why do some people argue it's not when it is in so many other diseases? Why would some people say it's not?
This is another one that's paradoxical. There's over 120 publications that clearly demonstrate that it is. Very massive publication I was just reviewing on OAN this morning out of Israel. It's over 6,000 patients. It's 16,000 in each arm. This is a major study. Natural immunity is superior. Why mandates? And is basically the same question. Why jab the kids? I don't get it. And it's illegal. These are still all in the United States. I noticed some Aussies chiming in. In the United States, all of these products are still experimental products. There is no licensed vaccine available. You can't go to Walmart. The stuff they're jabbing into the soldiers is not licensed. None of this is licensed. It's all experimental products. And it is illegal to force people to take experimental products. This is the thing that really lit me up at the start, that got me going, was when I had a moment to really think about what was happening here and how it related to the fundamental principles of bioethics that I've had drilled into my brain year after year after year, because I do clinical research. And in clinical research, we have to be super aware of where the boundaries are, because it's easy for clinical researchers to get so caught up in the moment that we end up with the Tuskegee experiment, to take an extreme example, okay? And so to keep all of us on the straight and narrow, there are these really clear, bright lines about what's allowed and not allowed. And the governments all across the world have blown straight through that. They don't care about those things. And they're mandating these jabs with experimental products that are far from perfect. And I personally, I'm kind of pissed off about that.
I think the mandates have hit a different button for people, right? And you're starting to see children and mandates really are pushing buttons. And I thought it was interesting that, when the mandates started coming down, you saw a lot of people in a lot of industries, from truckers to pilots to nurses to doctors to professional athletes, going no. And I think at some level, and I always like to point out the athletes one is fascinating, because those guys have great medical doctors and they care what they put in their body. Aaron Rodgers isn't just sticking anything in his body, but
it's more than that. If I can riff off of that just for a minute, Rob.
Yeah, go.
They are carefully monitored for their performance, as you know better than I, as a specialist in sports journalism. They have very precise metrics for how they're performing. And so they can see subclinical effects. So what does that mean? We say that we have a certain risk of cardiomyopathy in children, or whatever the thing is. What we're talking about is the risk that puts them into the hospital. Now, there's a whole spectrum of risk that's subclinical, doesn't put them in the hospital. Normally, people would say, oh, I've got some heart pain, or I maybe feel a little short of breath. Athletes have metrics. They know exactly how they're performing, and they know that their peers, after they take the jab, are losing significant fraction of their overall stamina.
Energy,
and
yes, stamina,
functionality.
performance. Yep. And so I guess, the mandate issue becomes one that triggers a deep issue in people, which is if you want the vaccine, get it. If you feel you need it, get it. Don't order me to get it as well. But here's the question that I don't fully get. And I know they're saying there's breakthrough, but if you're vaccinated and everyone who wants to be vaccinated is vaccinated, why do I need to get vaccinated? I mean, is it that I'm going to somehow get the vaccinated people sick, which means the vaccine isn't working?
So that logic, and this is what has supported this ancient Supreme Court position that really doesn't apply in the modern age because it was for a much more pathogenic virus. But the logic is that in some cases, the benefit to society outweigh the benefit to the risk to the individual. And so let's dissect that because it's a noble idea that we would take a jab. I mean, when I met with Cardinal Turkson in the Vatican, this is one of the things he brought up to me. He said, generally the church wants to endorse good works by people and selfless actions. And isn't it a selfless act to take the risk of the jab in order for the betterment of society? And I get that, okay? I totally endorse that. I wouldn't be doing what I'm doing if I didn't believe in that kind of logic.
Right.
Running around all over the country, driving myself crazy, not making any money. It's, I'd never do this. I do it because I'm trying to help people save their lives. So let's examine the logic. It is basically, if we could get to herd immunity, what does that mean? A level of protection in the population that the virus quenches itself. It's like a nuclear reaction and putting carbon rods in to stop the reaction from going nuclear, right? This is how we have reactors that generate electricity. Okay, so the idea is if you have enough people, they act like those carbon rods, enough people that are immune, and the virus will extinguish itself. It won't keep propagating through the population. This is herd immunity, okay? And the problem is, and so if we had a good vaccine, even if it had some risks, if the risk of the virus, is sufficient enough, we might say, hey, the risk benefit makes sense for the entire population. And in order to get there, we're going to have to insist that people take the jab for the betterment of all. Now, personally, I don't buy that, but that's been the historic logic. And also the logic that, why you would pressure people in society because it's for the betterment of society. Here's the problem. These vaccines are really leaky. If you do the calculations, and I can do those calculations, many epidemiologists can do those calculations, so it's not like a secret society thing, okay? If you do the calculations with this degree of leakiness with these vaccines, let alone the fact that they only last for about 4 or 5 months in terms of that protection, in order to get to herd immunity with these vaccines, technically, if you run the numbers, you have to have 140% of the population vaccinated. In other words, you can't never get there, okay? No matter how hard you try. So what's happened is the government has got all wrapped up around the axle with this logic that we have to get everybody vaccinated so we can get herd immunity and we can reopen the country and the schools and everything else and stop the spread of the virus. But it's all a lie. The vaccine is not good enough to get us there. And so what you're asking people to do is take risk for no benefit. And I'm all for, doing things for each other and for the population, but I am absolutely not on board with asking people to take risks when it's not going to get you there.
So, question, why wouldn't that same logic apply to natural immunity in that I know people who said they've had COVID multiple times.
No, actually, that's highly unlikely. There has been, for instance, early on, there was circulating influenza B virus that had a lot of these same symptoms. There's a lot of crossover between the symptoms of SARS-CoV-2 infection and disease and other respiratory diseases like seasonal beta coronaviruses and rhinoviruses and many other things, and influenza. Matter of fact, that's one of the problems is that they overdiagnosed COVID, or whatever you want to call it. Through the first year, they overdiagnosed it grossly, which is part of the reason why suddenly we had no influenza, because basically if you came in with a cough and a runny nose, you were presumed to have this SARS-CoV-2 virus. So in terms of the logic of all of this, I just what we're in right now is a situation in which the government has gotten dug in on a set of statements that they've made, and I don't know, they want to save face. We now have politics. It's going to affect the next election. It probably is what caused my governor here in Virginia, the election to go Republican instead of Democrat. Terry was absolutely positive that he was going to walk into the state house here, and he got squished.
Right.
And I'll tell you, Virginians are not pleased with these mandates and with the way that this has all been managed. And if they're any bellwether, and neither, New Jersey was squeaky tight, absolutely not expected. And so we're now in a political sphere. And the current administration has got themselves dug into a hole, and I'm afraid that they're forgetting the first rule of holes, which is when you're in one, stop digging.
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, look, not to get too into the weeds of the politics, but I think Joe Biden is not a very powerful leader. I'm not saying that as a one side or the other. He just never has been. And it's sort of like they clearly promised to end the pandemic. They didn't. Vaccines were their pathway out. And I think they're stuck on it. Like they feel it's the only way, and they're going to double down, just like Trump would double down. They're going to double down on vaccines. The problem is people are getting tired, Robert. People are really getting tired. They're like, you want me to get a vaccine? I want to get another vaccine. Let's not even talk about the third shot, which would mean you can't give the vaccine to people who need it in other countries. And wear a mask. And don't go in, don't go here and don't go there and get your vaccine card. I think people are literally like, enough, I want to go back to my life. And I don't think that's just people on the right. I think that's a wide group of people going, enough already. We're fine.
Hey, one of your commenters just made an important point that I wanted to follow up on.
Go for it.
In this thread, and we hadn't mentioned. In terms of the logic here, one of the things that happened in the first couple of waves is the hospital systems were overwhelmed. Mm-hmm. And when the hospital systems get overwhelmed, the mortality rate goes right through the roof. And not to mention all the press. And I do think that the commenter has a good point, that part of what is driving this politically is fear of the optics and the consequences of having the hospital system overwhelmed. Mm-hmm. And I think this may partially underline the whole push for jabs, because the jabs, and you hear it in what they say, they now acknowledge that the jabs aren't stopping transmission. They're not stopping infection. They're not stopping viral replication in your body. But what they are doing is reducing your probability for hospitalization and death. Now, here's the rub with that, as you pointed out. For most of us, that all applies to the high-risk individuals, over 65, morbidly obese, immunocompromised, etc. But for the majority of us, we're not going to end up in the hospital. We're not going to be putting pressure on the hospital. And natural immunity will give us much more robust, long-lasting, and up to 25 or more fold effective protection against COVID disease. So that's I think that it's not, giving them the benefit of the doubt, which I think we both want to do, right?
Right.
Let's assume that this isn't some nefarious devilish scheme by twisted individuals. Let's assume that people are trying to do the right thing. They're just, for whatever reason, not able to process all the information that's coming at them really fast. And I think a lot of what's happened is they're stuck in the ideas and the data of 6, 9, 12 months ago. And they're reacting based on the way things were then. And they're not able, there's so much information coming out so fast. They're not able to process that.
Right.
And as politicians in particular and public policy people, you can't just pivot, especially if you've dug in with lies. So I think your commenter has got a good point, that part of this is driven by the fear of the collapse of the hospital systems when they get overloaded.
And that was before.
Yep.
And we both know Dr. Corey, right? I mean, he was in those hospitals, in the ICUs, and we're not going to get a lot into the early treatment, but just to note, there's a number of doctors who are finding all kinds of ways to treat COVID and to prevent you from getting sick, perhaps from even getting it, but certainly from getting severely sick without a vaccine. Here's the question I have, though. How close are we, do you think, to being out of, are we actually kind of almost out of the pandemic already? When you think of how many people probably have natural immunity, how many people in the US, not worldwide, have been vaccinated? Are we kind of already almost at herd immunity?
So that's the other sick, sad thing about jabbing all the kids is, and Peter McCullough makes this point quite strongly, that we are reaching the point with the natural infection and the natural immunity that we're starting to approach the threshold of herd immunity. And herd immunity is not something that it just like suddenly happens, bang. It's a curve. It approaches, I'm going to use a fancy scientific word, it approaches an asymptote. Okay, so it gradually gets closer and closer and closer to herd immunity as you go along, and more people have natural immunity or have been vaccinated. So I think Peter's right that we're starting to get towards a point where we have enough people that have had natural infection that they are starting to buffer the spread of the virus. Here's the problem. Now that we're into it, now that we got ourselves all wrapped up over everybody's got to be jabbed, is that the jabs are causing short-term immunodeficiency, and they may cause a longer-term one. And so particularly for people that live in high-density urban environments, this is why everybody wants to move out in the country or go to Puerto Rico or whatever, is in high-density urban environments, after you take the jab, there's a period of time of like 2 to 3 weeks, maybe a little bit more, where you're immunodeficient because of the effects of the particles and the vaccine. There's something about it that's affecting key signaling molecules in your T cells. And so you have this period of immunodeficiency. And if you're in a tight urban environment where there's a lot of virus pressure, it's circulating, there's a reasonable chance that you're going to get hit with that virus during that period of time after you've taken a jab, when your immune system is kind of down for the count, getting the oil changed. And that's when you get bad disease. So there's a bunch of things happening here. And then this logic of rejab and rejab and rejab. Well, those of us that are seasoned vaccinologists or rheumatologists, that's the fancy medical word for people that deal with allergies, know that if you repeatedly administer an antigen, like we do with these vaccines, what you will do is generate tolerance. That's what you do with your child who has seasonal allergies and goes to the rheumatologist and he gets his allergy shots. Those allergy shots are basically a vaccine that's given at high dose repeatedly to shut down the immune response against that antigen. And this idea that we can just jab our way out of this with multiple boosts is crazy. It's naive. It's uninformed. It's the only thing I can think of is whoever's making that policy never took Immunology 101.
Well, look, let's be honest. The pharmaceutical companies have a huge interest in making that, right? And the whole fact that Pfizer, it came out that Pfizer, that they all used outside, for those of you who don't know, they hired their own people or outside consultants to do the right to actually administer the test rather than follow the WHO and let it be more transparent, right? And then it comes out that Pfizer's main company screwed up. I'm not saying intentionally, but they misreported data. They didn't have enough people, didn't have enough black people in the study.
That's another thing that makes me a little bit angry. I'm choosing my words carefully. I could say stronger language.
No, go for it. Say the strong language.
I'm pissed as hell about this because it's casting shade on my industry. Part of what I do is contract clinical research. I deal with these contract research organizations that do clinical research, and what went on there is like the worst of the worst. It is absolutely unconscionable. It throws shade on everybody in the industry. It's the kind of stuff that we're trained, and we have all these structures in place and rules and regulations and guidances so that kind of monkey business doesn't go on, because it's gone on for decades. It is easy to manipulate clinical trial results in a whole bunch of different ways. And these guys did it. And it is absolutely inappropriate. And
Well, it's immoral.
usually,
It's more than inappropriate. It's immoral, and it was profit. It was pure profit motive.
well,
They have no liability.
those companies that do that in normal times get shut down by the FDA. And the docs that are responsible, there's 483 letters issued, and those docs lose their ability to ever run another clinical trial. That's what would normally happen.
Right. So before we wrap up, a couple people have asked about future long-term effects of the virus, of the vaccine. I just had a ghost come in my screen of the future long-term effects. So, and this concerns me because I feel like we've now created this two divided things, Robert. One side is convinced that this vaccine is 100% safe. Give it to kids, give it to pregnant women, give it to everybody. Oh, we know it's safe. Like, just take it. And the other side is convinced that it's literally like going to wipe us out. Like, we're going to take it. It's gene therapy and we're all going to end up like mutated in 10 years. What's the honest reality in between there?
Well, I'm just going to extend your spectrum, your Overton window there. That's fancy political talk. Just a little bit more. I've run into young men who are proud that they have not taken the jab because they think it's going to make them more attractive partners in the future because their reproductive success will be improved compared to people that have taken the jab. And they're going to be more attractive to young women as a consequence. I mean, there's a huge range of belief systems here. What you're asking, what is a reasonable projection of
Yeah. I mean, let's just for a minute or two, just be honest. We know there are side effects. Well, look, we know it's not worth taking a risk with kids because no matter what, even if there's potential side effects, why would you subject them to that? Right? I mean, that's just a given. But everybody else is still concerned. Like, I hear a lot of younger people talking about fertility and pregnancy and sterility and how real are those concerns? And second to how real, do we have some idea how widespread that would be? Everybody's not going to become sterile, or are they?
I doubt it, but this is always a curve, and there's some very odd things. So what you're asking me to do is speculate and play Tony Fauci, and so I'm not going to do that. Because that's his big sin, right? Is he substitutes his opinion for facts. So if I'm going to maintain my integrity, I shouldn't do that. There's some very odd observations, and I'm going to share a story. Hopefully, I'm not going to offend anybody. I had the opportunity to testify before a rabbinical court of Hasidic Jews in New York the other day. And I learned things about Hasidic rabbis that I'm not sure I wanted to know. Among those things is that they, in that world, a woman, a wife, has to take a cloth and clean herself, let's say gently, and then show that to the rabbi on a daily basis. The rabbis look at these and they see about the menstrual cycle of all of these fertile women that are married to young men in the Hasidic faith. And so these older rabbis, I mean, it's kind of bizarre. They have an incredibly sensitive awareness to alterations in menstrual cycle that's going on because for them, it's crucial to reproductive health. And if you're a Hasidic Jew, apparently, expanding the population of Hasidic Jews is super important. So these rabbis are checking on the menstrual cycle of the women within their groups on a daily basis. And they're really upset because it's very clear to them that the menstrual cycles are being profoundly disrupted by these vaccines, and that this creates a situation in which not only are the menstrual cycles sometimes shorter, sometimes longer, very irregular, and so they can't ever predict exactly when they should be letting the couple produce new Hasidic Jews. And so as a consequence, that's part of a big reason why they said, no, we've made a determination. You should not use this in children, and we strongly recommend against using it in adults because of the potential reproductive risks that these rabbis, who would have thought it, have probably more data on alterations in menstrual cycle associated with the vaccine than anybody else in the world.
Right.
So there's
Which
that.
is bizarre on the face of it, right there. That was a lot of information.
It's direct first world example.
Right.
It is disrupting women's menstrual cycles. And
by the way, Robert, they didn't test, right? They couldn't. The CDC made clear, if you look, right, they didn't put many pregnant women in the original trials, right? They started test trials with pregnant women later, not in the beginning, right?
And the trial that they did, that they cite as the basis for recommending that it's safe to take these jabs in pregnancy, has been clearly demonstrated to have major flaws. It was only managed for a few months. It didn't take women all the way through pregnancy, and it was biased in terms of the distribution of women in terms of their first, second, and third trimester. It was predominantly third trimester. And generally speaking, third trimester pregnancies are much less likely to result in spontaneous abortions. When you correct for those artifacts, the spontaneous abortion rate, if you take those data at face value, is shockingly high in the first and second trimester. There's also many obstetricians and
from the vaccine.
From the vaccine, there's many nurse midwives that are reporting odd, babies with hemorrhage problems, altered placentas that show the signs of infarcts, that's blocking of blood vessels, etc. So there's a lot of kind of red flags here. Maybe that's not the best term. A lot of signs that this is affecting reproductive health. And then on top of that, there's the preclinical data showing the cationic lipid component collecting in the ovaries of the rodents and the decreased rat reproductive health. And so all this stuff together justifiably causes a lot of people to say, aha, I don't think I want to take this. And it looks like it might be a worrisome problem. Now, there's ADE, and somebody just posted that. It's starting to look more like there may be antibody-dependent enhancement or vaccine-enhanced disease, but there's also a more clear problem of original antigenic sin. Now, that's an advanced topic. I posted a bunch of links about it recently on Twitter, but that is a major problem that's probably driving this short-lived nature, the poor durability of the vaccines right now. So there's a bunch of things that are just, unknowns.
That was a question, and just a couple quick things. People have had so many questions up there, and I want you to direct people to where they can get answers to. Wow, there we go. The nose blow on.
I apologize.
No, I'm kidding you. You don't have COVID, do you?
Actually, It's an interesting question. I was in contact with somebody that had it recently. You were actually in the same dinner, just to let you know.
Great. Well, maybe I have it, although I'm vaccinated. So, no, but people have asked about why people get it after getting vaccinated. People have asked, are we just injecting people with HIV? People have pretty wild ideas.
Yeah. And then we get into the graphene oxide and the hydras and all that. There are glass chips in some vials. This is a known artifact associated with high throughput fill and finish vials in vaccines. It's resulted in the shutdown, I think, of the Merck vaccine manufacturing facility in New Jersey twice. There is also the problem of surfactants and things that are on the stopper that goes into the vials. And that may be associated with some of these artifacts that people are seeing. And then there is the metal chips in filings, and that may be a consequence of the pumps that are used to produce these particular formulations. And that would indicate that they're being used too long before being replaced. And what all of this stuff points to is shoddy quality control and quality assurance processes,
Mm-hmm.
which is exactly the problem that happens when you try to rush something out the door
Right.
like this and do it at high volume. So
But you're not giving people HIV.
I you know, I can't verify what's in the vials because Pfizer won't let us test, but I very, very much doubt that that's going on.
Right.
And the
And this
graphene
is
side, I really think that's a red herring too.
but we get a lot of red herrings. And as we wrap this up, I want to just go to a personal note, but also someone you know, Matt Mamoli, who is the director of Laboratory Infectious Disease Clinical Studies Unit at NIH, recently, last few days, came out and said, I was pro-vaccination for certain communities, but not for everybody. Don't force it on people. I don't want to get it. I want a religious exemption. And he said, I actually put this in front of Dr. Fauci a couple months ago and said, we have problems here. This is not the right way to do it. He is director of Laboratory Infectious Diseases Clinical Studies Unit. He's overseeing a lot of clinical trials at the National Institute of Health. And he's now coming out and saying, guys, and it fascinated me, they're going to let him do a live stream and do a debate about it. So maybe this is a positive sign that they're recognizing, even within the NIH, there is serious disagreement. This is not a one-size-fits-all, as you like to say, nor is it a one-view-fits-all, as some people in the media like to say.
So I know Matt personally. I've known him for years. He is a solid vaccinologist. He's the guy that pioneered the development of the human challenge model for influenza. He is just a solid player, and I'm frankly really encouraged that he has had the courage, because that's what we've got, is a massive failure of courage in a lot of the community, a lot of the medical community and the vaccine community. And Matt, to his credit, has taken a stance, and I'm relieved. His position about vaccinating those at highest need is aligned with what my position has been to date, and I'm hopeful that he will be given respect and listened to. That there are a number of signs that the monolith at NIAID and NIH is starting to crack.
It is cracking. It's cracking there. It's cracking in our political system. You're seeing people who were more traditional on the establishment side starting to come out. I mean, I think people have had enough, Robert. They're like, I'm done. And they also feel lied to. And you know, it's odd. I find a lot of distrust in Black communities, particularly like even on the left, because they've had to talk. The government's messed with us so many times. There's a deep distrust, and pharma, like we've got enough elements that I think it's great that he's coming out. What bothers me is that people like you still get censored. And I want to go back to where we started. How is it that a guy who's the architect of this technology, who cares nothing more than to create vaccines to save lives, is largely blasted in the mainstream media because you dare to challenge this technology, which you probably know more than 99.99% of the population about, since you helped create it?
Well, certainly more than the fact checkers.
No, more than 90. I mean, how many people? Can you put 100 in there? 200? 500? I don't know, 1,000? There's 7 billion people on the planet.
Billion. Yeah, so this is my specialty. I know this space really well, and I'm basically a government insider. And why the legacy media has felt it necessary, together with big tech and the Trusted News Initiative, and we can go all down that rabbit hole. So all I can say is that we are seeing a meltdown of our major institutions.
Mm-hmm.
The hospital system, the system for accrediting and managing physicians. The American Academy of Pediatrics gets most of its funding from Pfizer. Where the pharmaceutical industry has got a stranglehold on the Hill.
Mm-hmm.
We're in a situation where both the CDC and the FDA and the NIAID and the NIH are clearly captured by the pharmaceutical industry. Wait till you read Bobby Kennedy's book to figure out how that's all played out. And on the other side of this, we're going to be saying to ourselves, what the heck happened here? we've kind of allowed a creeping system where, like any kind of mission creep, things have just gotten subtly worse and worse and worse. And pharma has had their way with us. It's important to
Yeah.
recognize the amazing criminal track record of Pfizer. I don't know if there's any way to say it. The
No.
largest fines of
I
any
know. And look,
company.
anybody who trusts, the irony of the times we're in is the left used to distrust big pharma. The right didn't. Now the right distrusts them. The truth is everyone should distrust big pharma because they've never been about anything more than profit. I'm not saying they haven't done good things. I'm just saying their motive is profit. Their motive isn't to heal the world. Their motive is profit. And if they can heal the world along the way, right?
So you've got a situation in which the WHO has essentially been purchased and co-opted by Bill and Melinda Gates. Bill has major investments in all the vaccine companies. Everybody thinks, oh, what a nice guy. He's doing all this philanthropic work. No, he's making book off of this, big time. He's made a huge profit, and he's highly influential in the U.S. government, in the World Health Organization, etc. It goes on and on. If you look at all of these interlaced, horizontally integrated relationships, you find things like the chairman of the board of Reuters sits on the board at Pfizer, and it just goes on and on. And you have Facebook and Google. These companies we think of them as tech companies, but they've all got major investments in pharma and in vaccines.
Yeah, and I think that my hope is that out of a populist movement comes out of this and this changes. I do believe something good can come from this. I mean, we aren't going to be in this pandemic forever. We're not going to be in this vaccine hell forever. The mandates are pushing a serious button that's going to have more pushback. I want to kind of wrap up on your personal, I've talked to you about this before. Like everyone, you've had to struggle with this on a personal level. You got the vaccine, then you had side effects. You also have family members. You have kids and you have grandkids. And in your own life, that, like many families, was a challenge. Like their views, your view, your grandkids, your children, that's their children too, right? This is not right. No, my point is, it's not simple for anyone, right? Like for the average person, it's going to be terribly hard because you have to deal with it within your own, and some members of your family are vaccinated, some not, right? So I think the personal side is powerful.
So this gets back to the core, and it's not about me, it's not about you, it's about all of us. And what kind of a world do we want to live in? And the problem with the nanny state concept, because that's what it comes down to, is you've got to give up personal freedom if you are going to concede the right of the state to tell you how to live your life. And I'm of the opinion, and I think this is part of the major political realignment that we're seeing, is that a lot of people are coming to terms with the fact that they would rather have a little bit more personal liberty and a little less nanny state, and that they would have the right to make their own decisions. I'm of the opinion that the job of the state in a situation like this, and I'm trying to live it in my Twitter feed and everything else, is to give people accurate information and help them to understand the meaning of that information, but not to try to modify their behavior through these psychological operation tactics that are being employed, particularly in Canada, by the way, and the censorship and the propaganda. It's fascinating to look in on some of the documents that the BBC and the British government put out, because they're a little more transparent about it. They're all in on social engineering, and they're all in on using media to manage social engineering. And I think that the rest of us need to look at that and say, is this the world we want to live in? Because it's a slippery slope. We can all say, well, it's good that we have people of many different colors on Doctor Who. And we have a doctor that's a female this year. Well, maybe that's a good thing, because they've always been male before. And so we're supporting that agenda. But the problem is, when you're actively using media to manipulate society, And we could say, oh, it's good that we stopped showing cigarettes on television, you know, and we no longer have TV shows where they're sucking down the cigs all the time. And that's good because it's good for everybody's public health. But then those people that think about those things, because that's their job, now they're saying, well, maybe we need to manipulate it so that people can't even think about there not being global warming. I'm not disputing whether or not global warming exists, but censorship and propaganda and social engineering around global warming, I'm not good with that. And because it goes there, and then it goes to the next thing and the next thing, and you know, pretty soon I'm being socially engineered about what toilet paper I have to use.
Right. So let's end this on the notion of back to censorship. And by the way, I still smoke my cigarettes. I get the nicotine shield for COVID. Right?
Yeah, actually, okay, I don't know if we're allowed to talk about that.
Yeah, you can. On my show, there's no censorship.
The data, you're absolutely right. The data show past history of cigarette smoking is deleterious, and current smoking, nicotine uptake appears to be partially protective. Those are the data. I mean, and you know, that's a good example. We can say, oh, no, we can't talk about that. Well, there's deep meaning in that. What is the nicotine interacting with? What's that receptor? What does that tell us about the virus biology? We can never answer those questions if we're not allowed to discuss it. I think your nicotine example is a great little microcosm of this whole slippery slope situation we're in.
Yeah. And so to end it on the notion of how do we get, you know, as a doctor, as a scientist, how do we get to where we can have the conversations we're not having? Obviously, you're trying to do that. You know, Global, Pandemic Alliance is trying to do that. I'm trying to do that. You know, Roundtable's trying to do that. But, I mean, is it just a matter of enough people, not staying polarized, but going, hey, let's just keep pushing for the dialogue, the conversation in the scientific community, in the media community, because I'm not willing to throw in the towel. I think we can, and we are starting to see breakthrough, but we have to you can't have science in a vacuum.
So this gets to your earlier point about what is the silver linings. And I think this has been a huge wake-up call for all of us. And I think that what I'm hearing all over the world, as you know, I've been traveling too much lately. And I hear again and again a real concern about these centralized leadership models, these pyramidal, authoritarian, centralized leadership models that are all through our society. The World Health Organization is one example, but there's many, many others. And what I'm hearing is a real groundswell of enthusiasm for what I try to capture is think global, act local. Assembling groups of like minds and interests that are starting to coalesce and are building associations of associations. And they're doing things like setting up call centers so that they can stay in touch with their local community. I had this fantastic example when I was in Hawaii on Oahu. One of the councilwomen who is a native, by the way, the First Peoples all over the world are pissed off about what's going on in particular. So this councilwoman who's a native Hawaiian, her constituency, which is largely native Hawaiian, have really been hammered by this virus. They're generally obese, in poor health, and just not done a good job, just not handled this very well at all. And she's started to put out pill packs by her mailbox out front of her house, and they call it the coconut wireless. They basically the rumor network, and people are coming around and picking up these pill packs that they can self-administer, much as has been done in Uttar Pradesh. That's an example of a community coming together. And I think what we may see, if this is my putting on my, looking for the silver lining, but still looking in the crystal ball, I think what we're going to see is associations of people and community coming together at the local level. And that will eventually grow into things like local clinics and new forms of healthcare infrastructure, because what we all can agree on is the existing hospital, government, pharmaceutical, insurance industry matrix that we could call the medical industrial complex. It has failed us abysmally. And so what are we going to do about it? We got to rebuild,
but maybe build back better. Yeah. Maybe a couple people commented on journalism. In many respects, traditional journalism may be dead. There are great journalists out there, but the mainstream journalism it's sort of on both sides. It's somewhat of a propaganda. But here's the thing: the number of outlets, the podcast outlets like this, outlets like Roundtable, outlets like Joe Rogan, the number of places for people to get the message out, I think creates, CNN has 500,000 viewers. Joe Rogan has 18 million. It's like we are creating a different way to get information out there. And I think that's where we're going to change. We're going to change by reaching people and let them make their own decisions. Let them hear both sides.
And Rob, to your point, this has been one of the most fascinating parts of this journey for me. I never expected this, but after the Dark Horse podcast that went viral, I kind of got drawn into this podcast world. Each podcaster represents a node surrounded by a community. They're serving communities, and they are very diverse. They're all linked in an organic way, but they're all serving specific communities. And that is absolutely powerful. It is fantastic. These are self-assembling groups, interest groups, that are then building super assemblies and reaching larger and larger audiences around special topic areas. And it is blowing through legacy media. The control from above by big money and big hedge funds, etc., of major media and pharma and tech and blah, 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 that's all being disrupted. And the podcast, I think, is the tip of the spear in that disruptive technology. And I'm extremely excited about it.
And the new media in general. So for everybody out there who's worried about it, don't get worried about CNN. Don't get worried about Fox News if you want. Don't get worried about any of it. They're legacy media. They do their thing. There's a new way to communicate. And I truly believe, Robert, I believe out of darkness comes light. Somehow this has been a terribly difficult time in the world, and it's forced a lot of tension. And now we're at a juncture where things are cracking. And I think out of that crack is going to come something really good. Maybe I'm a naive optimist, but I think we will ultimately come out stronger, more independent, more dedicated to our freedom, and more committed to truth and shared information, not the other way around. I don't think we're going down the sinkhole and going to get trapped in a little 1984. Maybe I'm naive, but I don't think so.
And I'm seeing from the Chiron at the bottom that you're going to be following up on Reddit. Reddit is another example of spontaneously assembling communities that are really changing the world. They're changing how people are thinking, interacting with each other. And I'm reminded, I from time to time, I've had to deal with Silicon Valley type investors. And the thing that they look for, the little pearl they're always hunting for, they got a word for it: disruptive technology. And that's what we're going through, is a period of abrupt disruptive transition. And for those that are worried about the Great Reset and about Klaus Schwab controlling it, well, get on the stick, set up a podcast, because that kind of
gets your voice out there. And disruption is good. Look, mRNA was a disruptive technology in some ways. And it's not surprising that it's creating disruption. I look forward to the day when you're talking to me about how you're curing cancer with it, and people give you the Nobel Prize that you got nominated for. And then I'll be like, I know a guy who won the Nobel Prize. But, not surprising you didn't win it this time, but congratulations for being nominated.
So on that point, the good news is nobody else did either for the topic. So it's still in the running.
Right.
So we'll see.
Listen, this has been a great show. I appreciate you being on extra long. Appreciate producer Crafty for putting this together with us. And we're going to stay on just for a couple minutes on Reddit. But everybody on the mainstream, thanks for watching. Dr. Malone, you have your followers are they love you. You have a lot, 500,000 people out there. But don't worship Dr. Malone any more than don't worship the other side. I'm going to tell everyone, think critically. Think critically.
Absolutely. So that's the point. Don't give them fish. Teach them how to fish themselves.
Yep.
Teach them how to think for themselves.
Awesome conversation. We're going to do this more.
Okay, I love it. Be good.
All right, thanks. Thanks, everybody.